Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Ryan Noth, a filmmaker whose credits include the feature No Hard Feelings, the anthology doc The National Parks Project, and 2 seasons of the extremely addictive CBC Gem series Farm Crime. His latest feature, Drifting Snow, stars Sonia Smits and Jonas Bonetta as 2 strangers on a winter drive through eastern Ontario. It's available on VOD platforms today, and you should watch it. It's small, but it's powerful. And to that end, Ryan picked another small, powerful film about a road trip, Old Joy, Kelly Reichardt's 2006 breakout starring Daniel London and Will Oldham as Mark and Kurt, 2 old friends going to visit a hot spring outside of Portland. They haven't seen each other in a while. Mark settled down and Kurt didn't, but they're hoping to reconnect. They drive out to the country, they walk around, they find the spring, they come back. That's the whole movie, but there's another story playing out underneath, and it's the reason Old Joy never really leaves you once you see it. We discuss that. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I can't actually remember where I watched Old Joy, and it's so old that I was wondering if it was on DVD.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I don't think it was in a theater. I don't remember what festivals. Did it play TIFF or was it like a?
I don't know that it did. I don't think I'd even heard of it until I saw it at home.
Yeah. Okay.
They sent me a DVD because it was playing at the Bloor in 2006, in the fall of 2006. And I know this because I went and looked at my review to make sure.
Yeah.
And that was absolutely the first time I'd ever heard of it. I think I had known of River of Grass, but I hadn't seen it at that point.
Yeah.
So it was just a total discovery to me. So you had much the same experience? It just blindsided you?
The feeling I remember having about watching Old Joy was it was just like a dream that just passed through my head, which I guess is what you can say about your favorite movie anytime, really. But like it was only like 75 minutes. It had that Yola Tango score at times, and it was like a road trip and just drifting through the Pacific Northwest and like so kind of like hazy and smoky, and like it just felt like the next day I could barely pick out the details and remember it, but like it's something that washed over me and just kind of like really left an imprint, you know, like and I think I might have seen Wendy and Lucy first at a festival and then had rented Old Joy because I liked Reichardt stuff, but I just remember like it wasn't even something that left a great impression. It just like stayed with me over time, and I just kept going back to it like every few years, and just like being amazed at like how little there is in the film that is like super like powerful or in your face, but like how as a combination all the little details just make it like a really powerful and moving experience.
I always come back to the idea of the soap bubble. And I think I've mentioned it somewhere just fairly recently, maybe in another episode of the podcast. And I've recorded these out of order so much that I have no idea which one went where. But the sense that you're watching something so delicate and so perfect that could burst at any moment. And it contains this whole universe, this wonderful immersive reality of, you know, 2 people and a dog and the outside. And that's it. And you really don't need the backstory. The sense that something went wrong between them just hovers for almost the entire length of the film.
Yeah.
Whatever it was doesn't really matter. Clearly, you know, like nobody killed anybody and nobody slept with anybody. It's just something that happened to drive these 2 people on divergent paths.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing about it that stunned me when I saw it was, it's just a tone poem about getting older. Like, there are no insights. There are no great revelations, but it touches people at just the right point. I guess I'm trying to figure it out. I must have been 38 when I saw it.
Okay. Yeah.
And it came at exactly the right point. Like it just felt so, not that it was speaking directly to me, but that it was understanding me while I was watching it, which is a weird thing to feel, but that's how her movies land with me.
Totally. And I see this now in hindsight of the rest of her career as a really good companion piece to First Cow. Because they're both set in the forest. They're both 2 guys, and they're both kind of going like an alternative lifestyle or, you know, approach. And John Raymond, the writer, is the writer of both, and originally wrote them as novels. And I actually met John because I was so obsessed with like these first two films. I was out west, and I tracked him down, and I was like, "Can I just have a coffee with you?" And he was kind enough to meet me for a coffee, and we sort of stayed in touch over email. And like basically every film that comes out, I'm like, "This is genius, great job," you know. The short story that this is based on is like has a much more defined ending.
Oh yeah,
and like it's also very much more from one character's perspective than the others. So what I really like about the film is that you just feel like you're constantly drifting between the two guys, perspective wise and or point of view, but also like you almost feel like you're with the dog at one point, or like you're just kind of like just like this almost documentary fly on the wall. Yeah. And that's how it's shot too, you know, like almost like a doc. And I read something recently that it was made for like 30 grand, which is crazy. Like, and on film, it looks like too, you know, so 16 probably or something like.
I think so. It kind of, it arrived right in the edge of that mumblecore wave where people were discovering digital. And I think maybe it's her eye or just the pacing, but it feels classical instead. Like it's contemporary in that it's happening now and the concerns are relevant to the present day, but it doesn't matter. It could be happening. You're right. It does tie in nicely with the first cow. It could be happening in 1863 or 42 or whenever it takes place.
Yeah.
It's just so specific that it becomes universal.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some details too. Like I was just thinking about like when they go to get weed, when they're like, those are things that you just did in that era kind of thing where you gave somebody $15 and you just bought a little bit, as opposed to like now we just order on, you know, like all those different little details. Or I love when they talk about the only records or CDs left in the record shop are their friends, like being resold. You know what I mean? Like, this idea that like they can see time passing them by in this era. And like, obviously now with more time, we can look back on it and go, wow, what an era that was specific to them. You know what I mean? Like like record shops are just like, in that kind of lifestyle of like your friend's band and you like, you know, going out and meeting people in this way that's pre-internet, basically. I mean, the internet was there, but not, you know, as connected as it was kind of. It feels like. Well,
it's the end of the non-smartphone era, right? Like it's just before the iPhone arrives and ruins everything.
True.
So many ways. Because when you actually had to sit down and be on the internet, as opposed to just carrying it around with you, you could have the life these guys have. You could go off into the woods and be utterly alone and not tethered to anything. And, you know, the part of that whole hipster mystique at the time too was the embrace of vinyl and the embrace of old things. And there's a longing in the movie for the life that these guys want to have, but doesn't exist anymore already. Like they're already out of it. And
it's like they
rekindle that friendship that makes them who they were when they were 25.
Right. Like trying to rekindle this friendship that was happening before, like they know it's gone and it's an era that they can't get back, but like there's still this kind of like latent desire to just reconnect, or at least specifically in Will Oldham's character, like much more obviously, like it seems to mean more to him, although maybe it's debatable at the end. And the ending for me, like I remember first watching it, I just went totally over my head. I didn't get it. Maybe the first 2 or 3 times. And even like more lately when I watch it, I started flipping the other way and I'm like, maybe I was right in the beginning and not to read too much into it, because when his hand slips into the water, right? Like to me, it can insinuate so many different paths of where it went, even though we cut out of the scene, right? Like we don't see what happened, but like, did something more happen between them? There's kind of that tension. And like, that's what I love so much about all her work is like what actually happened in that space we didn't see or something, you know? And I know she talks a lot about John's writing in some articles I've read about how he leaves space for her to find those moments in her films. And that's what she likes about his writing and why they work together so often. So it's not ambiguity, right? It's potential. It's the possibilities that she packs into the frame. I was going to say it runs through all, like Night Moves especially is all about not knowing what motivates people. But I was thinking of something like Wendy and Lucy, where it's utterly concrete until the ending, which is also concrete. We know how the movie ends, but Wendy doesn't. Right. And that's what's so heartbreaking. Yeah. Like I think she believes what she's saying. Yeah. And we know it's not going to happen. Yeah.
And Old Joy.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. That's so harsh. Yeah, it's true.
God, yeah. No, I saw that. The one time I went to Cannes
Yeah.
Was 2008, and Wendy and Lucy was there, and I had to go be alone for an hour. I had, because I had lost a yellow lab a year and a half earlier, and it's just like,
wow.
No one can talk to me. It was the last movie I saw on the second or third day, I think, and I had to go walk around the Mediterranean coast by myself for an hour at like 11:30 in the French night.
I saw Wendy and Lucy in Rotterdam, so it must have been the same year or the year after, the cycle after, or whatever. But and then I remember we had to rush to a party right after because like I had a film there and stuff, and so it was like, wow, like my whole mind, half my mind was just like thinking about that while I was at this party trying to like talk to people, and I just couldn't let it go. It was so strong. It was just incredible.
Yeah. She's such a remarkable filmmaker.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're about to say.
No. Just like I'm kind of watching it as we're talking, just like playing it in the background, and just amazed at like, again, the way they communicate without without the internet, but like to the point that he has to go get them, and he's not there. He waits on the porch for him, and then Kurt is like, why don't we take your car? Because basically I'm living out of my car, my van or whatever. Like it's just so, and it's so Pacific Northwest in that era to me. Like the van has all these stickers on it and stuff, and like it's just, and he's just putting a TV into the van for some reason. Why did he get a TV? Like he's living in his van. Like none of it seems to make sense. But in a weird way, I think that is it Daniel London? Daniel,
yes, yeah.
What's his character's name? I can't.
Mark, and Kurt. Yeah,
like he totally wants to be brought on this adventure. It feels like the whole time he wants to like slip back away from the kind of like misleading opening, which is like with his wife and the meditation bell and him being at home and trying to like have this domestic sphere, but that it keeps getting kind of broken by like a blender or like the phone call or all these things.
Yeah.
And he wants to go on this trip, but I think he also it feels like he kind of wants to be in that world that Kurt is straddling a bit, even though obviously like it's a dangerous path to go down because Kurt is pretty much homeless. You know what I mean? Like, but there's like that allure of like, we can just get on the road and go to the forest and everything will be okay because there's a hot spring and like we're dudes and we'll just have a great time, like, so yeah.
That Kerouac illusion of freedom that, nobody like Kerouac didn't manage it. Nobody does that. Nobody does it successfully, but yeah, Mark wants to fool himself into thinking Kurt has it right. And maybe Kurt desperately needs Mark's approval, even though, I mean, there's this thing that Oldham does where he's just out of sync with everything around him.
Yeah.
It's like he waits a little too long before he talks. He thinks like he's so lost in his own head that his posture isn't right sometimes that you can just sort of feel him forget to pose himself. And it's clearly acted. It's conscious. It's a performance, but it's remarkable in how fluid it is and how it sort of permeates everything he does. And the van becomes an extension of that. And just the sort of this lack of attention to detail that he has where, the hot spring's this way and they get there. He's not wrong.
Yeah.
But he doesn't feel like he's a confident person in his own life. Like he's in any kind of control of it.
Yeah.
And that is weird and unsettling to watch in a movie, right? Because you just keep bracing yourself for something to go terribly, terribly wrong. And I think the most tense the film ever gets is when somebody raises his voice for a second. It's just not that movie. But there's this sense of seething something that's missing between the two of them. And are they trying to plug it back in? Are they trying to figure that out? Or is it just something that they'll never talk about? Like this unacknowledged tension that runs through their entire lives.
Yeah. And like, I feel like watching it too, just looking at some images of, Mark driving, obviously his vehicle, but like, if you think of it as you're the viewer and you're with Mark and this guy's taking you on this ride, but doesn't really know where he's going. It's the same thing as the movie, kind of like it just kind of goes. And then like it gets figured out in the end and you just kind of roll with it. And I mean, I guess that's what Reichardt's movies kind of are. Like you have a general idea of like where it might be going, but like it's almost irrelevant if I told you like a Reichardt movie starts at A and ends at B, because like it's all the stuff in between that is like the interesting stuff. You know what I mean? So and that I don't even like, it's so hard for me to fathom as a filmmaker, like how her and Raymond are able to create those worlds where it's like, it's like you said, it's the specifics, the detail of the era, of the characters and of their lives, their context are so sharp, but they're not like overly like dramatized. You know what I mean? They're just like imbued in the characters. And Mark has this kind of sense of like, not dread, but like, is Kurt going to do something crazy at any moment almost? Do you know what I mean? Like, he's going to throw him off or something like that.
Apprehension, right?
Yeah.
Like he's braced and we can feel it. We can sort of, it reads through his shoulders. It reads through his body in an unnerving way. The UK box set that I was playing with earlier has an essay in there by Larry Fessenden, who's her frequent producer and occasional co-star. And he mentions that there's a hint of a potential of psychosexual murder. And it's just like, that's exactly right. That's exactly what that is.
Yeah.
But I think if you mentioned it to either character, they'd be horrified.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's not who they are. And it's the contrast between how Kurt obviously sees himself and how Mark sees him, and how Mark wants to see Mark, and how the person he wants to be isn't the person he is.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. And I'm not sure which, but each of them like would really be happy being the other person for a while, or at least they think they would. And again, never spoken, never discussed, just there. Yeah. And we get it. We understand that rhythm from this movie that, features people. I mean, I knew who Will Oldham was, but I'd never seen him act before. Yeah. And it was like discovering this fully formed world that I didn't even know existed. Yeah. No, he's incredible. And like, I really like what she did, like with the music, that like sometimes when you're working with a Will Oldham or someone like that in a role, you might be inclined to use some of his music or some of his even not with lyrics, but just some of his output or whatever. But like the fact she went the Yola Tango route, which is very incongruous for the rest of her career, which is basically no music whatsoever, or score maybe, but like very minimal. Like there's something about this that just like cruises along for me on this wave, because like you get those like amazing like ambient moments of like just highways and like trees and these like really lightly like picked guitar lines that are super reverby and just kind of dreamy. And like it's your point about the mumblecore is really interesting, because mumblecore like went on, so we're saying 2006 or no, 2008. Okay. So yeah, like it was kind of ending around the end of that decade, right? Like, the big, the Duplass brothers had already started to go mainstream, and Swanberg was branching out and becoming a more producer than filmmaker, like 2008, 2009. There was a festival also at the Bloor, actually, in Toronto, either in 2008 or 2009, that had stuff like nights and weekends and maybe 8 or 9 films over 3 days. And it was great, because you just got a sense of what was possible and also what wasn't possible. And exactly how far people could push the format. Frownland, that was the other one. Yeah. The really big one. Yeah. And Reichardt's films just sort of slid past. They weren't included in the wave. That's the thing. It's really fascinating. I never thought about it in that perspective, because like in reality, this is almost like an anti-mumblecore, but like it still has like some of the tenets of it. You know what I mean? Like it visually, or like editing, pacing, those kind of things. Like it's the opposite of those, and framing and stuff. But like in their conversations and in like how the movie just kind of like slips from place to place and like detail to detail, it's totally a mumblecore adventure story. You know what I mean? So I think as long as the focus is philosophical, you can count somehow as a mumblecore movie. But her interests are just not the same. Like it's not shaggy in the same way, and it's not underfed, I think is a word I would use. Not underdeveloped, but a lot of the mumblecore movies were just sort of satisfied at having brought themselves into existence. You get the feeling that if you push it any further, they would collapse. Old Joy doesn't have that. I mean, it's light, it's gossamer, but it's strong. It's like spider silk. It's not going to crack. It's not going to snap. It's fully contained. Yeah. And I think too, framing wise, like a lot of
like I'm trying to think of her films since this time and how they're a little more rigorous in their framing, and this has a bit more handheld feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure a lot of it is the budget and the resources and all those things, but like they still do this one really cool shot at the gas station where they're like in the back of the car with the dog and like watch the characters come toward the car and then open the trunk and like put it in. It's just like she got creative and like within her means. And then there's always these nice tableaus, but like the funny thing to me is I was watching it for research for my feature that I made, because it was a big inspiration for me. And I was like, I want to check out the driving shots, like the shots of the car driving and them in it, or like, how did they do that? Or just the exteriors of what they were shooting, like the forest and the river going by. And like, a lot of them are not good, like qualitatively, like, or qualitatively, yeah, on their own. They're just like not great shots, you know, like they're shaky and they're like off kilter. And like, you know, I like, it's very strange from a production point of view that they're not ideal shots in a way, but like they're in this movie that it somehow as a sum of its parts just doesn't matter. It's just like, you can't pinpoint and say, oh, yeah, that shot's not great. You know, like the movie sucks, or like this thing, like, it's just the whole world is like that vibe. And I don't know, like to me, that's kind of the greatest achievement of the movie is like you can almost watch any frame and go, yeah, that's a nice frame. That's a nice shot. That's a nice line of dialogue. That's a nice whatever, you know. But like, it's only when you take in the whole thing, and ideally in one viewing, it's only 75 minutes. So why not? But like, and maybe that's what the best films are. It's just like when the whole thing washes over you, and like, yeah, you could nitpick some details, but like, what's the point? Because like the whole film is just so beautiful as a poem or as a complete piece, you know?
Yeah. I was wondering the last time I watched it, if it isn't some kind of strange subjectivity that's going on, where I found myself wondering this time if they were going to look at me. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. It feels like we're tagging along. And had they turned and looked straight down the barrel, had someone acknowledged the camera, I don't think the film would be any different. Like, it would just be part of that.
Yeah. Unless Haneke directed it or something, then it would go off.
Well, yeah. Then something terrible would happen and the camera would beat me to death. But yeah, and maybe it's just as simple as having Lucy there, having, you know, Reichardt's own dog, who will co-star in her next film, be part of it. And she's constantly kind of throwing her gaze around and looking around, and she's present in a way that most dog actors aren't. I don't know how to describe it. I interviewed Reichardt at TIFF, the year of Wendy and Lucy. And she said that Lucy, like, it's cheaper than getting an animal actor. And also that she trusts her, and she knows that she'll do, like, in both cases, the dog would just, wherever the ball is, that's where the dog is going to look. And she knew Lucy well enough to trust that if she gave one of the actors the ball, that Lucy wouldn't go very far.
Right.
And it's, again, it's like this kind of weird confidence that the camera has in everything that just makes it feel natural and unplanned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a strange story about Lucy. Like it's, and I read too that, like, mostly
it was a stick, but with this one, it was a ball.
Yeah. But I read that, like, so this one was made for 30, and then Wendy and Lucy 300,000. And I was just like, wow, even that seems small for like Michelle Williams, and like, you know, what they pulled off with that. Again, like, shorter for a feature, but like the leap from Oldjoy and Wendy and Lucy seems very significant in a I don't know, like, career professional move. And River of Grass, like, I remember seeing it in the when I forget who it was, did a re-release.
The restoration that came out a few years ago. Yeah.
It was
I crowdfunded that.
You did?
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, not entirely.
Yeah.
I was part of the Kickstarter. How do you not, right?
Yeah. And so I'd never seen it. And when I saw the restoration, though, I was like, I still think like the jump from that to Oldjoy is hugely significant. And then from this to Wendy and Lucy. And then after that, it's like, she just like embraced all her powers, and like, she's at this super level, like, of just making films that are so patient and poignant and complex. And like, they're kind of, to me, the Alice Munro kind of short stories of the cinema, where they're like, there is so much going on, like, that's not being discussed. And that's what the movie's about, you know?
I mean, like Certain Women practically is a short story collection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Structurally and just in its heart.
Yeah. And there's one Alice Munro collection called Open Secrets. And that's what I love about, that's what I relate to like a lot of these stories that Reichardt makes is like in Night Moves too. It's like, you kind of know what's going to go on or what's happening, but then like it takes a twist and we know things the characters don't know, just like in Old Joy. Mm-hmm. And we know when they go off the trail that like they're either not, or we think they're not going to find what they're looking for. They're going to get lost, and they do. But then they kind of find this discussion that we've kind of wanted them to have, or we didn't know we wanted them to have, but we wanted them to have around the fire at night. You know what I mean? Like, and that is so satisfying because it's like he finally not said something meaningful, but like said something that like brought out that latent tension or emotion that we've been feeling the whole time. And it just like, it's kind of cathartic as a viewer to finally, you know, have them just like get out at each other almost, you know what I mean? So
yeah. So much of her films are dependent on the audience. Like they just, you know, I've used this example all the time, but the Transformers movies don't need us. They
right.
Like people in the theater are almost irrelevant. They're not built for applause or interaction or thought. They exist to make noise and money. Mm-hmm. But there are filmmakers who, you know, Soderbergh is another one. Haneke probably is another one too, who depend on people understanding the work for the work to live. And Reichardt's always been like, you can feel the communication. You can feel the attempt at communication. And so many of her movies are just about people trying to understand each other, which is like the source of all drama.
Yeah.
But yeah, Old Joy was the first one where, well, it was the first one of her films that I saw, but it was the movie that just hit so hard and it's like, oh, I'm going to follow this person forever. This isn't a fluke. Whatever this is an aesthetic. Yeah. This is intentional. And it's been such a rewarding journey over 15 years now. It's wonderful to watch what she's done.
I think she's my favorite filmmaker, you know, like in the past decade, 15 years, whatever it's been. Like I just like on a consistent basis, I don't really get that much more excited for a new film from someone like other than her. Like, I mean, I've had my moments with others for sure, but like, and I know her output's been like fairly consistent, like over the past decade, like every few years, you know, so like
2 or 3,
and the scale that she's gone up to too, with like Meek's Cut Off and like all these other films has been really fascinating to watch. And like no less entertaining than any of the other films. And the fact she does period pieces, but like is not just doing like a period piece with like, I don't know, like a better camera, you know, like a lot of period pieces feel like today, or like a slight change or like more comedy or something like that. She does them with like from like a weird documentary verite perspective. And I guess that's like an element of Old Joy too. It feels like you're just kind of like, you're literally that Frederick Wiseman, like almost like fly on the wall. And like, you're like, okay, I guess I'm here stuck, like watching these guys trying to find a place to go and get to and have a good time. And oh shit, now we're lost together. And like, now what do we do? Like, oh, okay, we're going to sit around the fire and drink, you know, of course that's what we're going to do. You know, like it's just a very, almost like reality TV scenario that just is like filmed with much more visual panache.
In as much as there is a progression of events, it's not even a plot. It's just they go there, they come back. That's really all that happens. But there is a life to it and a fascination to it that it's I know. I'm thinking of the Linklater. I'm thinking of the before films, right? Like if there was another movie, if she did one of these every 9 or 10 years and just caught up with Carl and Mark.
Right. That would be amazing.
I would want to see that. I also don't want that. Right. I don't need it.
Yeah.
In the same way, I don't want a sequel to Wendy and Lucy, or I don't want to catch up with Wendy and find her. Maybe she made it to Alaska, but she's miserable. It doesn't matter. Right. Like they exist in that window of time that I spent with them. And I think that's all we should have. You should wonder forever.
Yeah.
But there's enough richness in the worlds that she creates that I would happily go back to. If she said there was a story worth telling, I would believe her.
Yeah. And interestingly, in the short story at the end of it, so at the end of this movie, which like is always really hard to remember what happens, like the actual final shots, and like there's really not much. That's the thing.
No, Mark goes home.
Yeah, but like in the short story, he actually goes out another day, and Mark does, and he sees Kurt like in a sort of down and out area in the downtown, like kind of panhandling and looking for money and things like that. And instead of going to him or saying anything or letting Kurt see him, he just kind of like drives away. And it kind of has the same effect. And when you're reading it, the short story is much more about Mark's perspective, or from Mark's perspective. Mm-hmm. So that makes more sense in a way at the end. And it's fascinating to me that in the movie, they didn't even try and go for some kind of like, I mean, classic Reichardt, but they didn't try and go for some kind of more definitive ending of some kind, you know, like it's just completely wide open. So, yeah.
But that's her thing.
I know.
I mean, the closest she's come to, well, you know, we talked about Wendy and Lucy having a pretty clear ending for the audience, but I was going to say something like Night Moves, which is kind of direct. The story has a deliberate end, even if it's not the end of a character's story. Right. But that's the one time she sort of moved into genre almost and tried to acknowledge thriller mechanics, but it's so clear that's not where her interest lies.
Yeah.
Not to the detriment of the movie either, which I find fascinating. It's just this great argument between telling a paranoia movie story and telling a Kelly Reichardt story.
Yeah.
And just like, no, I think I'm going to go this way because that's where I go. Yeah. And I love the fact that she didn't really try to bend to fit the material. Although I will say that the audience I saw it with at TIFF that year was incredibly unsatisfied with it. And they wanted justice. And it's like, that is not what she's about.
Yeah. I think Night Moves is underrated. And because I remember on first viewing too, I was like, I don't know, like this is, and then I watched it again and I was like, wow, this is actually really good. And I didn't realize how good it is like at the first viewing. So I think it's going to have a sort of comeback in her. I don't know, because I remember it getting kind of like not negative, but like not great critical response and like being this like people saying it's a weird mashup, which it is, but like I think it's actually really fascinating. And like, you know, Eisenberg is whatever, but like he still has his moments in it too, like that are really good. So I think it's kind of been forgotten. I mean, because she makes so much good stuff. It's hard to like just quibble with any of it, but well, and her, you know, and it is sort of the odd man out in her filmography too. Yeah. It's just, it doesn't feel like one of her movies until you watch it the second time and you realize it's exactly like everything else she's ever made. Yeah. It's just darker and meaner. Yeah. Like I always remember from my second viewing is when he reaches down and touches the dead deer in the beginning, like that's on the side of the road and then like pushes it over the edge. And it's just like, that's like only a Reichardt moment. Like that's not like whatever they're trying to genreify it or bend it. Like that's like her putting that in there. Cause like, it's amazing. And it like says so much about him and like what he's going to go through. And so, I'm wondering about, in Oldjoy here. So I feel like we should discuss the ending more.
Sure, we can if you want.
Because I want to know. So before I say anything, I want to know like what you like. Where does your mind go with that ending, or like not the ending, but like the sort of pre-ending, technically the sauna scene or the bath scene, and what happens there, which to me is the climax, I guess, of the film. Like, what's your interpretation, and did it change from first viewing to, you know, repeated viewings?
I wonder. I don't think I've ever changed my feeling about it. It's really, I don't have an interpretation. I don't think. I just, it feels like a moment where, again, like there's a potential for something, and maybe it's violence and maybe it's not. Right. And I think the fact that neither of them can articulate what it is that might be happening is the point to me. Right. It's that, it's, I don't know if it's an attraction. I don't know if like you get the sense that maybe this has happened before and this is why they haven't seen each other in so long, whatever this energy is, whatever it is going on. Like is Kurt attracted to Mark? Has he tried this before? Was the whole thing, I guess, actually, that's not what I said about it not changing isn't true. I think over the years, I've decided that this whole trip has been an attempt to get Mark in that situation.
Interesting.
But Kurt doesn't know what he wants. That's the thing I've come to decide, that
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a gay thing. I don't know if he just wants a hug that no one will give him. If he can't, it's the thing about being out of sync. I don't think he knows how to express whatever it is he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what freaks Mark out. And I suspect that's exactly how it went the last time.
Yeah.
That it's an inappropriate circumstance compounded by a gesture that isn't very well articulated.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what it is. Like, I think that's what fascinates me about it, is that the movie gives you absolutely no direction on what's happening. And it's so disorienting.
Yeah, totally. I'm watching the final couple shots of that bath scene right now. And like, so basically there's a point where Mark is feeling uncomfortable, whether because he's giving him a bad massage or just he's feeling uncomfortable. And then he relaxes, and Kurt continues, and then his hand, which has a wedding ring on it, slips off into the bath. Yeah. And I didn't pick up on that my first few viewings. That's one of to me, that has much more significance as I've watched it more often, and just made me like, yeah, because then you see like a close up of Kurt massaging him. And then you see a close up of Mark receiving the massage, and then that's about it. And then it cuts to like a waterfall and some nature shots, and then they're walking away. And that's the beauty of how she tells the story. And Mark seems to enjoy it by the end of the actual massage. Like he seems like, almost like it's definitely some kind of sensual way, whether it's like emotional, like whatever he's receiving it in, like it's a positive thing. So in a weird way, it's almost like they've come to an understanding without saying anything, even though maybe they aren't either one of them any clearer about their feelings,
Yeah.
Which is kind of like, maybe you've had this like a common, maybe male experience where you go out with someone on a road trip or into the woods, you camp or whatever. And, sensual bath experience aside, you have a bonding experience of some kind. And then like, you just drive back, like, and it seems kind of anticlimactic and straightforward. And, it's just kind of like, that was that moment, so.
Yeah. Well, I think men, I was going to say Western men, but that sounds stupid. I think the concept of masculinity at this point has become about building fortresses for ourselves.
Right.
Like everybody has to, you can have designated emotional outbursts, but they have to be because somebody died, or because something really bad, or because your car got dented or something. Like we've seen how it is expected for men to behave. And yeah, we're not talkers or sharers by culture.
Yeah.
And that, like, it's a huge problem, I think. And part of the weird hipster look of Kurt comes out of, like, feels like, I mean, it's pre-hipster. Everybody else is going to look like him in 10 years' time. But in 2006, he looks like he's left over from the Iron John movement of the 90s, that weird, soft feeling, male poet warrior thing.
Yeah.
Which was kind of bullshit, but also kind of not the worst idea to get people. The problem with getting people to talk about their feelings is a lot of people don't have anything to say.
Right.
And Reichardt is listening to the silences, to the way that they don't communicate. And that's the thing that struck me as feeling real, because that's exactly the experience that I had when I was in my 20s with friends who just, and myself included, like we weren't capable of articulating how we were feeling about anything.
Yeah.
We didn't have the textbooks. We didn't know how to discuss our feelings.
Yeah, but what Kurt can tell you about is like how he went to this awesome beach party and like had sex with this woman and like did all these things, but like he can't, whatever his real sort of love or feelings are, you definitely get the sense that like he can't breach that. And he only did in that like drunken moment because like, he was presumably drunk. Like that's the reason why it wanted to come out, but that seems like it was the excuse, Yeah,
he found a way to let his guard down.
Yeah, exactly.
Consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah. But yeah, it's, I mean, it now makes me, like, the more we talk about it, it makes me feel really sad for Kurt.
Oh yeah.
Whereas Mark, I was like, okay, he's got, I mean, maybe that was always the case. Mark has his shit sort of together in the sense he has a life planned, and Kurt is so drifting. maybe that's, you're bound to feel that way. But the more we discuss the psychology of it, the more I feel worse for Kurt, because even though Mark can't express himself either, it seems more damning for Kurt. Like that's the thing that's going to stop him from, moving out of his van, or like,
Yeah. Well, like Kurt is lost. Like he's and maybe he sees Mark as a way to moor himself, as a way to lock himself back into some kind of trajectory or some kind of life, but that doesn't happen. Right. And whether he ever says it to him, whether he desperately needs to tell him, it's all in Oldham's performance. Like he's always about to do the thing that he needs to do, but he never does.
Yeah.
So you just feel profoundly sorry for him. I assume they'll never see each other again. I think they'll think of each other all the time, but I don't think they'll ever see each other again. And that's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though we only spent 24 hours with them, you know what I mean? Like in a car going to a hospital, like when you're like, oh, this is heartbreaking. They'll never see each other again. It's like the relationship we saw with them was complex. It was not easy. They had fun, but like they also like got lost and didn't, like it wasn't like it's like we're putting so much, not faith, but like some kind of belief in this relationship they have, and we're only with them for 24 hours, so. Yeah.
There's a Sinead O'Connor song on one of her early albums called "This Is the Last Day of Our Acquaintance," and it's a breakup song, but it's angry. This isn't angry, but that title would have been absolutely perfect for this movie.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
And I think again, it's a movie that has this incredible wisdom about what it's showing us. The characters don't know, like Wendy at the end of Wendy and Lucy, they don't know where their futures are going, but we can tell. And the movie knows it, and it's feeling like its heart is breaking for them. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's part of the observer thing too. Like you have no choice by the end of the movie but to feel the way Reichardt feels about them.
Yeah. I'm just thinking too, like, I mean, do all the characters in Reichardt's movie like go their separate ways at the end? It almost feels like it.
Well, Mixed Cutoff leaves everybody lost.
Yeah, so but they're going to make a decision to go and probably go different ways. You know what I mean? Like,
the party will splinter off. I just assume they're all like they're going to die around the next mountain.
Sure.
That we've been watching the Donner Party. We just didn't know it.
Yeah, but like even Meeks is all about deciding whether you're going to go your own way. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so it's like
they're pioneers.
Almost every movie, people separate. Right.
Yeah, I think Certain Women has an ambiguity to a couple of characters, but they're on their own trajectories, certainly by the end of it. Yeah,
to the point, like I forget her name, but when she drives her truck off the road near the end of Certain Women, and it just like literally goes through a fence, like it's like she can't control like the fact that she's separating from this person she loves in it. So like, wow, I never really realized that like almost as a dramatic strategy, the characters come together in the beginning and then basically are forced apart by the end of it, whether it's Wendy and Lucy or, these guys. And this is interesting too, because, she hasn't really made, not that she needs to, but like, this is the film about kind of guys that she made, you know what I mean? Like, and she like nailed it so hard to me. But like, after that, it's kind of like, I don't know what her motivation is, obviously, but like, it's like, she just did that. And it's like this, like, she just painted it with like a perfect few brush strokes, it's like, she almost doesn't have to ever say anything again about men or something. You know what I mean? Like, not that she doesn't in her other works, either by their absence or by who they are, but like, obviously the protagonists in her other movies are all generally female. So,
except for First Cow, right?
First Cow,
15 years later, she's revisited it with a story about two men. But even that relationship is, I mean, just by virtue of taking place in the 19th century, it can't be the same as the masculinity of Oldjoy.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's
much more formal and reserved in its. And plus, we're seeing the beginning of a friendship rather than the end.
Exactly.
Although maybe that's why
they also part ways at the end of that too.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So we see the beginning, I guess, and the end, and that's and then another interesting thing is just like the time. Like this movie is like 24, 48 hours, whatever it is. Wendy and Lucy is maybe 72 hours or something like that. Like the time of the movie.
2 nights go by.
Yeah. And then like even then Meeks, I guess, is like a contained week or whatever. It's almost like everyone got a bit longer or something like that. And the first cow is like a bit more extensive amount of time that you can actually see the start of a friendship and the end of it in the same movie. But it's really curious to me how Old Joy is just that very contained sense of time. And it maybe that's what makes it feel so fleeting. You know what I mean? That like you literally feel like you're with them, even though you're obviously not, for like every minute of that day or time they spend together, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's the Linklater thing, right? Like the 24 hours or 6 hours or 10 hours that take place in the Before movies or some of his other films. There is something really compelling about limiting the window of a film. I just saw, what did I just see that takes place over the course of a day? Oh, I revisited True Crime for podcasts like it's 1999, the Clint Eastwood film, which takes place over 24 hours and is just the slackest, slowest paced clockwork thriller. And it just, they're like, someone's going to die at midnight, and it has no intensity at all. And the time it takes to tell its story feels like you're spending a full day with them, but not in the right way.
Right.
But yeah, in the right hands, that kind of limitation becomes an incredible strength. And Reichardt obviously knew how she could do it, right? Like she could pace it properly, and she could do it gently enough that it does feel like that much time is going by, even though it's shorter than almost any other feature. Yeah.
Like I read, it was a 20-page short story, a 50-page treatment or script, and then a 75-minute finished film, which makes sense. Cause like, even as a script, like what are you actually going to write? Like there's dialogue, but like the scenes themselves are pretty sparse. You know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of description or not a lot of,
entire action. Scenes are, they walk further.
Yeah.
And that's fine. It works beautifully. Yeah. The longeurs of the film are, again, for a movie this short, the idea that it is so gentle and exquisitely paced is kind of striking.
Yeah. And it gets quieter too, right? Like they're talking more. And then by the time they get to the hot springs and after, it's virtually like not silent, but like, you know what I mean? Like it's, one other thing I always wondered about was the radio in the car. Do you know much about this?
No.
It's from like an American government news broadcast or something like that.
Okay.
So it's kind of got a political bent to it. And they're just kind of like, it actually always annoys me when I hear it. Cause I'm like, they're just like yammering on about like some like, I don't know, conservative agenda thing or something like that, on the radio. And it just seems like so odd that it got placed in this movie, like on purpose. And that these guys, I guess they're listening to it, or it's just on the radio in the background. I didn't get the sense they were actually paying attention to it. But like early on when they're driving out and you see some visuals of the exteriors and stuff, I guess it kind of just helps set the era, the milieu, like these are hippies, but they're still in this other world that is kind of around them, like.
Yeah. I just assumed it was a commentary on the fact that it is like Bush's America, that it's not going to allow for the kind of life that Kurt wants, that he is trying to get to something that doesn't exist anymore. And that maybe Mark being, a future family man I was trying to figure out if we were being prepped to see him as a sellout, but I don't think that's the case either. I don't think he's abandoned anything.
I think the opening of the film is fascinating too, because in the first 2 minutes you get like this, the character of the wife is very unappealing, I have to say. Like she just kind of like gets upset with him, makes a smoothie, and and maybe she's rightfully upset that he wants to go off when she's pregnant and all this stuff, but like just her kind of reaction to everything is so dour, and it's like it doesn't make you feel like it's a happy home kind of environment that they're going to bring this child into necessarily. Like not that it's a bad environment, just that it doesn't feel like what maybe Kurt might imagine it might be, which is like a happy domestic life. You know what I mean? Like that Mark has it all. And so it's interesting that sets us up in the beginning. We see Mark's family, or what his wife and their soon to be child. And we think like, okay, he has these things in place, but like there's something off with it. It's not perfect. So then when we see Kurt talking about Mark having his stuff together, we know like he might think that, but in reality, Mark's kind of like struggling a little bit and trying to understand how to move forward with things and meditating in his backyard. And you know what I mean? Like he's trying to find peace. Like, so, yeah.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to Lucy being the only character who's just totally happy.
Yeah.
And their attention is split. Like they're in the woods, they're having the same experience, but neither of them is fully present until the end, I think. Like it takes almost the whole trip for them to fully disconnect and be themselves and abandon whatever else they were carrying. And the dog is just kind of having a ball, which I find very soothing.
For sure. They get that cozy cup thing and they like toss it back and forth and they just give it to Lucy and she goes to town on it because she's like so happy to have this thing. It's useless.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's an amazing film. And I just think that like the way it just kind of every time I watch it, I just like it washes over me and like I just feel like it's a dream unto itself. And like it's so short. It's just like it's really a poem to me. And it's pretty experimental in a way, like it's not like, I don't know how many people I would recommend it to without like knowing their taste a bit more. Like,
right.
If I'm going to introduce someone to Reichardt's movies, I might go Wendy and Lucy first, just because Lucy's such a striking dynamic with Michelle Williams in it. And like their story is so heartfelt and strong, and it's a short movie and it's powerful. But like Old Joy to me is the one that I'm like if you have sort of the patience, I guess you need to kind of watch it in a way, I feel like, you'll be so rewarded. But like, it's like, I'd only recommend it to people who I was going to say really like, but like, I get it. You're going to appreciate this. You're going to try to appreciate this. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, it's the third date movie. Like it's the movie you try for on the third date.
Right.
To see if they really get it. And if they get it, then they get you.
What's the first or second date movie then?
Something simple, genre picture,
something.
Yeah, something everybody can get behind.
But then you test them with the Old Joy on the third date is what you're saying.
Well, you just not test them exactly, but you offer it. You want to see if they respond to it.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that, this is special to me and I'm trusting you with it.
Yeah. It's like if you're making a place for someone and you'd be like, oh, I want to put this on because it means a lot to me, but I'm scared it might not mean something to you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's one of those movies I wouldn't watch with anybody.
Yeah.
You just give it to them and have them go away and watch it and come back later with a report.
Yeah, exactly. Or you don't say to someone like, hey, like, let's have some drinks tonight and watch Old Joy. Like it's just kind of not that vibe. Yeah. But
I suppose you could leave it out and bring someone over and it's like, oh yeah, maybe you like that. Let's find out.
Yeah. And it's a quick enough watch that if, they're still awake and around, then you can always watch something else too.
Yeah. It's a trust game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is there, we sort of touched on it a little bit at the very beginning. Is there an element of Old Joy? Is there something of Reichardt's work that you've borrowed or appropriated for yourself over the years?
I definitely think that feeling of ephemerality, like that I really get from the sort of like, it's easy to say driving shots that are whipping by your window and like that you can recognize, I feel like that passage of time or that like looseness that you're just in the middle of something and it's passing you by and you're just kind of along for the ride. So I think I've always tried to like bring some of that into my films and my new feature is definitely a road trip. So it's like, I definitely went back to a lot of this and I set it in the winter and around the area I live and my chickens are in it. They're no dogs, but they're chickens. And, the sunflowers in the front of my yard that I grew that were dead in the winter are in it. You know what I mean? Like I put all these like things, not necessarily because I think they signify more because they're mine, but because I didn't have much of a budget either. And like they were there and they're a powerful image to me that tries to communicate something about a feeling, which is the biggest kind of thing I always try and take away from a Reichardt experience. I mean, she's so good with actors and so good with characters and all that too. But like, it's somehow the landscape and the way she treats the landscape as a character that really has attached to me a certain importance in how I think about my films, like geographically and like, landscape wise and things like that.
Yeah. It's not just that they're creating an environment, but they're inviting us to live in it.
Yeah. And I think that sort of documentary element maybe is like something to do with it too, where you just feel like you're a member of the people in the story. You know what I mean? You don't, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your No Hard Feelings 10 years ago was shot in like on my block. So I keep looking, I was like watching it. I realized I was kind of looking for myself in the corners.
Right.
And then I realized that sort of wasn't the point, but it kind of is, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and I remember there's a shot in it of like the AGO, the front geary, like swoop still being under construction with like wood. It's not finished. And was always really happy we had that. Cause I was like, this is like a detail about the city that like will forever be finished. And here's like a little glimpse of it that's like not quite there yet. Or like, like I always wanted to shoot it, like rotate this. Cause like, I was like, it's on Queen and like 5 years from now, it won't be there. And like, of course it's not there anymore. It moved somewhere, or like, these little things that moved around. I always kind of wanted to like capture them and document them as something. And because my new film has been delayed, I know that that's happened here now too. Like, so there's a Sir John A statue in Picton that, was there, but like kind of under construction around it when I shot. And, now it's like been painted and like, like people have done their thing to it, like, and so just seeing, I love when I can capture something that it changes over time. If it's just part of the landscape, but it's part of the fabric, I guess, to me, of that community or that space or something like that. So yeah.
And then 20 years later, your characters can revisit it and do the before thing.
Oh man, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like Reichardt. It's like maybe just best to leave those characters where they were and let them like have figured things out or not in their minds, But yeah, it is sometimes tempting to go back and say, what would have happened to those guys, yeah. But I don't know. Making a movie in Toronto now is just like would be so different, like, I mean, I don't know. I was walking
Kensington
home,
isn't even Kensington anymore.
I know, man. And I was walking home late on New Year's Eve, like 2-3 a.m. on Dundas, and I was just like, there's no one outside, like, and I was like, it's late, but like there's just no one out on the streets. And I started filming it because I was like, people are going to want to know what it was like when the streets were completely empty on New Year's one night in Toronto or something. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where it surfaced for me or why I filmed it, but I was just like shocked that like, and I know during the day it's much quieter too, but like it was a real shocking experience to me. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But,
the world changes, right? The city is different every year, but yeah, it feels like I'm trying to connect it to Old Joy somehow, and it's not happening. But
yeah, no, I mean, think about Old Joy being a road trip too, and like the pandemic, like what that's done to the idea of a road trip. Like I made my movie 2 years ago, and it was supposed to come out last year, and it's a road trip. And now I'm like, what do people think about that? Like where two people would just get in a car together and like drive and like spend time that close and like go to a diner and do those things that you did pre-pandemic. And it's kind of, now I feel like it's kind of the point where it's kind of comforting to see those stories, you're like, oh, right, you could do that and go to a hot spring and not worry about like all the things associated with that,
Yeah. A lot of producers have said they don't want to deal with COVID in their television this year because we have enough of it at home.
Right.
Which I find fascinating, the idea that there will be entire seasons of television produced now that deny reality, like that actively don't acknowledge, where still like there's a show called The Unicorn with Walton Goggins and Michaela Watkins. And all of a sudden this year, there's been a lot more outside stuff. And it's this casual little thing. They're not acknowledging the pandemic, but they're shooting outside in a way they didn't in the first season. And it just makes me wonder what other weird little tweaks we're going to see 10 years down the road and watch something, find a rerun of something, or just find something on Netflix and go, oh my God, this was made that year.
Yeah.
It's trying so hard not to acknowledge it.
Yeah. And when I watch Bridgerton or like some of those shows, I'm like, man, this is so like over the top, like from a production point of view, like, like I think about it as a like COVID thing, like it would cost so much to make this because of the condition. Like I think about whereas I wouldn't think about those things before. And I'm like, oh, it's just kind of extravagant. Like they wasted this money on a period giant set and all this, and I'm like, but that's just the cheap doc filmmaker in me, like getting it probably. So yeah.
My thanks to Ryan Noth, whose second feature, Drifting Snow, is now available to rent or buy on VOD platforms across North America. You should watch it. It's pretty good. You can find Ryan on Twitter at RJNoth, all one word, RJNOTH, and you can find Old Joy on Blu-ray and DVD in the Criterion Collection. It's also streaming on the Criterion channel. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I'm hosting a bunch of podcasts these days and writing the weekly Now Streaming newsletter, to which you can subscribe at nowtoronto.substack.com. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Stay home, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out. I'll see you next time.